Morning, welcome to this week's video. We're pleased to have Paul here to talk to us about photo etch. Photo etch has been around for over 30 years. It was kind of a miracle in its day. You took really fine brass, well originally it was all brass, but now they do it in other metals as well. And they made these really fine parts because molding of plastic back then couldn't allow you to make things this detailed. There's all kinds of little handholds, seat belts, meshes, you name it, gun sights, things that would have been impossible to make in plastic, but through the miracle of photo etch, we got these super fine details. Now people either love photo etch or hate it. I get a lot of customers in, even to this day, that say, I will not do photo etch. If there's photo etch in a kit, I just toss it because it frustrates me. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to work with it, and I'm not going to wrecking my model using this stuff. But if you see somebody like Paul, who always blows my mind. I've never seen a guy that can work photo etch like this guy, especially when he gets to the soldering part. He puts photo etch together better than I put plastic kits together. So it's just something to see. So I think he can walk you through the basics of this, demystify the process, and make you a confident photo etch user. So please, take it away, Paul.
Thank you, Bill. Slide over. One thing that's happened in the last probably 10 years is photo etch is no longer as prevalent in base model kits as it used to be. I remember back in the late 90s, early 2000s, you could get one kit with 4 large sheets of etch. Now this is considered a large fret. This is from a Mini-Art T34. In other cases, Tamiya just over the past few weeks released a Panzer 1B, and this is the photo etch. It's one screen. That's one area. Screens are the one piece that is still best recreated by photo etch. Some people do it in 3D printing, and it's getting better, but it still can't really match at this point what photo etch can do. So anyway, as with any technique in modeling, the quality and the use of the tools is extremely important. A good tool might seem expensive, but it will save you many hours and probably many dollars in not damaging the photo etch. My favorite tool that has come out, this is a Tamiya photo etch holding pliers. Very flat when they're closed. You do have a very tight grip on something as thin as photo etch, which is measured in, very much thousands of a mil. They also do not have teeth, which you don't want. Anytime you are holding photo etch, if you use a set of pliers that does have teeth, you will damage the photo etch. Especially if you're using it while soldering, you will damage your parts. Now these come in several different sizes. These ones I like they're the largest size. They do have a smaller size that's more of a needle point. Again, very efficient. There are also, I just found this out actually last week, but also by Tamiya, they have a set they call bending tweezers, if you can see any of that. And it's a very fine, also again very flat and no teeth. That will hold something, if you're an armor builder and you're doing a photo etch tool clamp, this will hold it very securely so you can fold the whole thing in one and not lose the part, not do the tweezer launch. So those are all the different holding pliers. Apart from that, you can also use any set of tweezers, as long as a lot of them will hold a very small, they'll contact a very small point. That's not always the best because you may launch the part. But you also have some that are flat, more like a screwdriver head. You have that, and ones that are even larger. I like these both for holding parts. And if you're soldering, it becomes a heat sink, which is great to not disturb other solder points you've already made, and also saves your fingers. Yeah. So what I've done here See any other tools? The last tool, again, essential for large pieces of etch, is a hold and fold. This is one of the very first ones that came out. I've been using this one for at least 20 years now. When you are preparing any photo etch piece, consider it like a plastic piece from a kit. That a plastic piece has a seam around the outside. Photo etch will also have a bit of a seam around the outside just due to the etching process. So what I like to do for that, again, Tamiya, they call it the diamond file. I have one here. This is absolutely essential for photo etch. You get rid of any of the burrs or attachment points. You can also use it to rough up photo etch for glue and for solder. Speaking of which, for glue, to me it's the I don't like gluing photo etch for the reason that you always will have a piece come off and you see the amount of glue left behind, even though you think you're using minimal glue. One thing a number of people have used, which is a great idea, is instead of the regular gap-filling cyano, they use a black cyano. And after that, once you've glued, there will be excess glue, and the uncure or any kind of dissolving agent for cyano, you see the glue that you need to remove. It's a fantastic process. So, my setup for handling basic photo etch, to remove any piece from the runner or sprue, I like using a curved blade. If you use a pointed, like a number 11 X-Acto blade, you will snap the tip off. You also don't really have as much control. So what I'll do with this, again, this is another T34 set. I'll remove one of the stowage bins. Again, with the curved blade, it's very, very straightforward, very easy to get right up to the piece and remove the points. Now, when I am cutting photo etch, I do have, this is an old plaque from a show. The plaque part's gone, probably used to help make a building or something. And I like using wood. I use just a bit of thick paper stock. It makes it easier to see the etch, and you also have a bit of a cushion when you've cut through. You're not going into a hard wood that could or will damage your knife blade. So there we go. Once I have that piece removed, the diamond file will remove every one of the burrs. And even when there isn't one of the attachment points, I will run it along the entire piece. This is actually another area where if you are trying to file a piece, that this one's by photo etch standards fairly large. But what I can do is hold it with the bending pliers so that I don't accidentally damage the piece or bend the piece while I'm filing. So anyway, that's the process to clean the piece. By running your finger over it, you can see if you've removed all of the burr or not. And then you can just go back over it. So now with this piece, I have the option of using these flat pliers along the larger bend, but what I would prefer to do is use the hold and fold. I'm not sure if that's going to be visible, so. Now, when I did purchase this, it came with 3 different lengths of razor that you use to actually do the fold. So there's the largest fold. You know, perfectly to a 90-degree angle already. Now with the bending pliers, the other pieces will come in to meet it. So in a matter of seconds, we have a piece that's ready for whether you use glue or solder. That piece is ready to go. I do have one here that I assembled probably many years ago, and that is completely done, completely soldered. We will have close-up photos or a video of this added on later. And that has the same sort of, you know, again, another stowage bin. So it has the main body as one piece that was bent around. The top is a second, the lid is a second piece. It has 3 hinges and 2 clasps, but also the little locking hasp in there as well. So it's quite a number of pieces. They're all soldered. If you use your assembly of soldering properly, you won't disturb previous soldering points. So I've got that. I do, as sort of an extreme example, when I mentioned that photo etch isn't as prevalent now as it was, back 20 plus years ago, you could get add-on sets that replaced major assemblies with nothing but photo etch. This is from the German locomotive BR52, and the entire cab assembly has been replaced by photo etch. So you have a scale thickness there that the plastic did not do. You also, it had the rivets in place that were actually better than the plastic. One thing that was pointed out to me is that the door openings, you can still see parts of the original tree of more obvious on this side. Those are other parts that will have to be removed and added somewhere else. I left those on just to add a strength and a rigidity while I was assembling all of this, because that was a lot of soldering. I still see areas where I do need to clean up some of the soldering, which is actually a very simple process. Also, again, hard to see, if you can, in here. There we go. There is a handrail in here that I use brass rod or brass wire for. So just the level of detail you could get with this stuff was off the charts. Now, here's something engineering-wise, this is fantastic. This is the screen from the Tamiya Panzer 1B. It's the only piece of photo etch, and it has to be bent to quite a specific curve. So what Tamiya has done is included 2 pieces. So you'll cut off that piece of etch the same way as I showed earlier, bend it around here, and using that piece will press it in shape, and it will hold its shape. So again, it's just, you know, it's great, great engineering. Now this silver etch, this is more of a stainless. I don't know what the amalgam used, but anything that is, any photo etch that is silver is less likely to solder. Edward, all of the plated Edward will not solder properly. I'll show a way to test whether it can be, because Aber solder is also a silver color, but that's more of a tinned solder applied to it, so it solders incredibly well. Anything that is a more of a brass color will solder. We're back after a short break. What I'm going to do now is show a few of the basics of soldering. The tools for soldering is, I've obviously got my Kester solder, and it's a rosin core solder, so it is basically a tube that has some flux in the center. Generally, there's not enough. So I also have resin flux. If you, depending on where you live or what's available to you, as long as you have a solder and a flux that is compatible, you're going to be fine. So the purpose of the flux is to break up the surface tension and allow the solder to flow incredibly smoothly. It literally flows like water. So once you're more and more familiar, or the more familiar you become with these steps, you can manipulate the flux, like any kind of putty or anything. You can really use it as a separate tool. So what I've got here, I mentioned earlier tinning. The concept of tinning is to cover the metal with a very, very thin amount of solder. Same way a tin can is, a plated can. So for that, I like using old paint jars because they have a brush in them that you can use for the flux. And what I will do is, make sure I'm on camera here, is run the flux over the edge. And I rarely apply the solder directly to the piece. I normally put it on the soldering iron. And for this, I'm using what is a fairly narrow screwdriver tip. You can also get a kind of a pencil tip. I don't like those because it takes longer to heat up the part. So a little puff of smoke, you can tell that you've got some solder on that, and you literally run that along the edge. I'm trying to add a bit more than necessary just so you can see it. I'm not sure how visible that's going to be, but there is a fine silver bead of solder. Now this is something, I cut this piece off one of the runners because if you're learning to solder, one of the things that's going to happen, you're going to think, oh, I don't want to risk damaging the parts. So I'll flip this over. I've got a fairly large bare space here. What I'm going to do is also put a little bit of flux on that. And you'll see now, and clean the tip, take a very small dot of solder. And you can see as it goes onto the etch, there you can see it starting to bubble. It's slow, so I'll add more flux. And now I can spread that solder you can actually try, if you're doing this on excess pieces of etch, see how far you can make a very small amount of solder go. So what I'm going to do now is hold the piece that I have tinned the edge. I will do it sort of a butt joint up here. Add a bit more solder. And just by running the iron across the joint, again, it'd be very hard to pick it up on the. You can see the silver. That is a continuous joint. That is as good as any kind of filling you would do with putty. Normally I set my iron at anywhere from 600 to 700. I'm finding it's kind of slow now. I'm going to go up to 750. Which raises a point, one of the big concerns people have about soldering is thinking that you're going to burn yourself or hurt yourself. And as long as you're careful with the stuff, it's probably not going to happen. And to be honest, even if it does, it's not as lasting or as painful an injury as a number 11 cut, which we've all done. If you do happen to tap yourself with an iron, it cauterizes instantly. There's nothing to worry about. But that being said, it's best not to burn yourself. So that's when I will hold the various pieces of etch with a good flat, toothless or non-toothed set of tweezers or photo etch holders, just to make sure you've got that heat sink. If you're doing something and through the tweezers you start feeling heat, then just remove the tweezers and the parts from the heat source, because you're actually adding too much heat. So anyway, there we have that piece. And that's kind of indicative of a lot of the soldering you will do, is you'll add a little bit of solder and you'll manipulate it to where you want it to be. This is something a little bit more advanced. I have the screen for the T34, and I've got the little, make sure again, I've got the frame for it. So what I'm going to do is tin the entire, the surface, the mating surface of the frame. I'm going to tin that whole thing. There. And with the added, by upping the heat, you can see how quickly this is flowing. And that little bit of solder is going to tin that entire frame. In this case, I'm going to add more solder, and you'll see why afterwards, but I actually want to use more solder than needed just to have that surface covered. And you can actually tell how much solder you've put on if you put on too much, because it starts to get that kind of half round look to it. So there, so that piece is now, again, very hard to see against a white surface. We'll see if this helps. There you go. Now you can see that the whole thing is tinned and ready for the screen. So at this point, again, I'll do another application of flux. And now I will lay the screen down on top of the frame. I'll put my head in the way here. And now I'm just going to use the flux that I added plus the solder that I put onto the frame, and that will be enough to mate the screen to the frame. Now in this case, I'm just using my fingers to hold it because this is so fine, there isn't going to be significant heat transfer. There we go, now that's attached. I left that frame on the runner, again, just to give it a strength and rigidity so it's not going to go out of shape. So what I now have is the frame and the screen is attached, and it can go onto the plastic piece. This became necessary when I tried gluing one and it failed miserably. Ended up not fitting as well as it should have or could have, and I ended up having to remove that and destroy it, so I had another piece that I was able to use. Point before I forget it, and you can even see on that white paper, that's residue from the flux. You have to clean the flux because obviously you can't paint over it, and what I use for that is acetone. And what I will do, I did work for many years where I soldered every day doing stuff that makes this look massive. And we had an ultrasonic cleaner with 2 jars in it, just baby food jars, that we would put solder in. We didn't put the acetone right in the ultrasonic cleaner. You know, we had a little rack we had built. So the 2 jars would be suspended, and you'd put them in one. It would turn a little dirty, and you'd take it out of that, strain it, put it in the second one. If necessary for something like this, you could do 3. If you don't have an ultrasonic cleaner, just get some jars and just go in order. So you have your first one, second, third. As the second and third start getting dirty, they become the first and second, and you add a clean one at the end. But it's necessary to clean it all, then put it on some paper towel to wick off the acetone. So anyway, those are two different uses of soldering. As you could see from that other piece, this was something in my modeling for many years. I would gauge, my interest in a subject was gauged by how much photo etch and how much soldering I could use. So yeah, it's not being used as much now, but when you need it, it's nice to have that skill. So for the next segment of this video, we're going to call up Evan McCallum, who you may know as Panzermeister 36. He has done very limited soldering. He's interested in learning this. So what will happen is you will see a very skilled modeler take on a new technique and see how quickly he adapts to it. Okay, so Evan is now set up. He is feeling a little trepidation. Yep. So he's going to go through the same steps that I did of doing that butt joint of a piece of excess etch material, brass material, onto the runner. So step 1 is to apply flux to the small resin piece, and for that you'll need to hold it with a...
I'll just get rid of a burr there. I did... Paul actually gave me one of these a couple years ago, and I use it every day now because this is much better than anything else for cleaning up the burrs.
Okay, and you'll want to use one of the pair of tweezers. That'd probably be the best one to hold the piece, and you can apply the flux to the edge.
How much am I applying? Just like that?
Quite a bit. You can't really add too much. Any excess will be cleaned off anyway. And you'll tell over time if you didn't use enough and need to apply more. It's like using super glue.
More than that?
That should be good.
Okay.
And now clean the tip.
Yep.
And apply just a little bit of solder. I'll add that right there. There you go. And now you'll see it's like painting. That's probably a better way of phrasing it. That once it has adhered to the brass, you can draw it right across the edge. See, that's perfect.
All right.
Okay, so the next step is to tin the piece you're going to solder to, so the runner.
Just along there?
Yeah.
Right here.
There you go.
Clean this off, or actually...
Yeah. It's always best, every time you apply it, you should clean it, because there will be some kind of slag on it.
I guess. All right.
And you can solder, tin that piece now. There you go. And you can see by increasing the heat, you can see how quickly that flowed compared to... Now you'll add more flux first.
Yeah, I'm just going to figure out how to hold this.
There you go.
Like that. More flux on the surface between them.
Yes.
And just heat up the joint. Easy as that, and I guess I could probably smooth that out a little bit. Now, if I heat it up, will it just fall over?
If you heat it, it will fall over now if it's not held.
Yep.
and just run it across the entire length of that piece, and you'll see a really nice smooth joint. I can see that even there. Perfect.
It's not too bad.
So the first impression most people have is how easy it is to make the solder flow, and it's made easy because of the flux. The flux really is kind of the superpower here.
Now I look at it, it's not perfectly square, so if I needed to adjust it, I can simply
Yeah, actually,
heat it up and
please
bend it back
do
a little
that.
bit.
That's a really good point. Solder is extremely forgiving. If you don't like how something looks, you can heat it, take it apart, clean it up a bit, and redo it. You know, it's much easier to redo photo etch than it is plastic.
Kind of worked.
What you can do is let the iron sit against it longer, and you'll see it will actually, the heat will start to
joint will become
desolder an entire section of it. And also, actually, at this point, if you add more flux, that'll make it easier too. There, because right now you can see the camera might not pick it up, but you can see the flux bubbling along the entire length. So there you go.
Yeah. That was much easier than I expected it was going to be, but
that always happens. and you didn't burst into flames.
Yeah,
we had a good day.
Myself.
Now, one thing I'll do, I'm not sure if it'll be visible. We'll just switch spots
I got a little
here.
bit of flux on that.
Oh, that's fine. Again, Astrom, so I'll squeeze here. So the advantage of doing this is you have both tested the compatibility of this flux and solder with this brass material. So we know that works. It's also a way of testing things out so you're not going to use up or damage, you know, an essential piece of a model. Now what I'm going to do is, this is the stowage bin that I previously bent into shape. One thing I did, I made sure, and you can attest to that, that it's perfectly where it needs to be.
Yeah.
One thing about soldering is you don't want to count on your soldering to hold a bend in place, because as you heat it, it will release, and then it just becomes harder to fix. So the reason I like doing these stowage bins with soldering is that you can actually simulate the weld bead. So what I'm doing here, this, make sure it's visible, that is the surface that needs to be soldered, both there and then a number of other places around the whole thing. So what I'm going to do is add the flux to the inside. Okay, just move a little bit out of the line. Also to the outside. And now, by applying the solder, first of all, I'm going to strengthen it by getting some of those corners done up. And it just moved a bit. Now, I'm going to take a little bit more solder than I've used on the other steps, and I'm going to run that along the inside. After I've done that, a little bit more flux to the outside of it. And by just running the iron, you'll see the silver, you'll see the solder coming through. more spots here. So what I've done now is, by doing those steps, I've actually used the solder to fill the gaps. You know, wherever you have two flat pieces that join on an outside, you will see that connection. So I've used the solder to fill that. You can also see that it's already cool enough to touch. Now what I'm going to do, normally I would clean this first, but I didn't want to use acetone in a store setting. So using the two finer sections of a 4-grit sanding stick, supplied by Hobby Center, shameless plug. A solder does sand incredibly easily. You know, much more so if you use cyano for anything, this is no comparison. And then using the finest one to give it a buffing. Now also along the bottom. The rougher one first. And then buff. And this is a step, whether you use glue or solder on photo etch, if you do buff the surface with a sanding stick, it will hold glue much easier. You're giving it something that it can bite into. So that bottom section is going to have to actually be glued to the fender of the vehicle. So what we have now, and I'll show that to Evan, the inside doesn't matter.
Yeah, because you won't see it.
But the outside, you can't really tell where the bead was.
That's fantastic.
So it's incredibly smooth, much superior than any kind of any other techniques you can use. I'm biased about soldering. I'm not sure if that's really come across. But so what I will do now is have Evan do a slightly larger version of a bin, but you can do the bending using the tool and these guys, and then go through the whole same process. And the reason we're doing this too is to show, again, Evan is a very skilled modeler, but this is a brand new technique to him. So for anybody doing this, it's a new technique, and showing we're taking the intimidation away from the technique. So I'll let you slide over here.
All right, back in the hot seat.
Yes.
You've already cleaned that up. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. There's your razor blade.
They're underneath the the cutters there, nippers.
All these.
You can use either of those.
It's the world's biggest blade there.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that this hold and fold is great for any kind of long fender that you need to bend a little lip, because it'll hold the whole thing. You can bend it up and you don't get that kind of warping or curvature you do if you try to do it bit by bit. There you go, perfect 90-degree bend.
I think for some of these I can probably just use the pliers here. This from a trumpeter kit or a dragon?
That is
aftermarket.
It's Aber Etch that is designed for the probably the Dragon T34s. I find the good companies, when they design etch, they measure the real thing. Not like some companies in the past who would measure the kit part and improve it, but if it was out of dimension. Why I love Aber Photo Etch.
have to get some of these Tamiya bending pliers.
They are very, very good. I honestly can't recommend them enough. Now, if you overbend it, it'll pop back into place.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how to make sure there's no... Make sure it's in the proper spot, otherwise it'll try to open up when you heat it.
Yes.
Yeah, that'll work.
That will.
It's a bit of a gap, but I guess if I just hold it with the tweezers when I solder it,
Yes. And the heat and just using the iron sometimes will spread it out a little bit. But
all right, so
there
first,
we go. The flux to the inside.
which is mainly that joint, and then the...
Yeah, and you'll see like everywhere you bent. Yeah. So on that bottom piece, on 3 sides, it will be a joint to be soldered, and up the sides.
Now, will you solder the, like, let's say for example, this angle here you just bent? Would you solder that to reinforce it, or just leave it?
You can. You don't really need to on there
because you already have the
right
both edges of it on the bottom.
Yes. Now the edge that you mated, so
over
that
here.
one, that's going to be the first point that you solder to hold the whole thing more in line.
Okay. Just applied the solder all on the, or the flux all on the inside joints there.
Yeah.
And now we will just solder it up. I guess sometimes it feels like you might need 3 hands to get this all closed up properly.
Yep.
There's a bit of a gap there. Is that going to be a problem?
If you use the tweezers to hold that closed now. And what you're doing is like a tack weld that you're going to do on that corner.
Might not be close enough. If I can tack it over here, I can probably get it to close better, I think. Will I burn myself if I hold it like this?
Yes.
I don't think it's alright as it is.
One of the advantages, if you're holding a piece and soldering it, once it starts burning, you'll drop it right away. So it's not like hot melt glue that we mentioned earlier.
I think I need more flux on that, actually.
Yeah, you can never really overdo the flux, as long as you have good cleaning techniques afterwards. Okay. And from here I can see that the solder's on there.
Yep. Not perfect, but I guess when you sand that, it'll look better.
Yes. So now I'd start on the opposite corner from where you just did the tack, otherwise you'll melt the tack as well.
All right.
And on the inside pieces like this, if it's not going to be visible, you can add more solder than you would for any visible piece, because you will clean off the flux and any excess solder, unless it's a structure that you want to see a nice neat interior. It's a stowage bin, so it's going to be open, there's going to be stuff in it, so you don't really need to worry about the appearance of the inside.
A lot of solder in there, but
There you go.
I guess you can melt it away if there's a little bit of excess.
Again, on the inside, you don't even need to worry about it.
Need more flux.
Yep, that's a good point. The flux does burn away, so even though you haven't got to that point, you will have affected it.
And once that's moving, it's fantastic. It's like when you put
Yeah, it flows like water.
perfectly thinned wash along a weld seam, and it just goes on its own.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why, like I said, it's really easy to manipulate it. And for more advanced techniques, I have actually simulated welds by overdoing solder on certain joints. And afterwards, both with the iron, that you can kind of stipple it as you're moving along, you can create an actual weld bead, because that's what it is.
It's not great, but I can hold it together.
Okay, yep. And now if you put more flux and run along the outside of the bead, that's when you recreate the visible part.
Look over here.
Yeah.
Look at this spot here as well. Joints come apart a little bit there. A bit of a gap, but I guess I could fill that with the smallest amount of solder to some degree.
Yeah. Now what you'll find too is as you're heating that, you can probably push it back into shape by holding it closer to where you're soldering and putting a little bit of pressure. You'll see it pop right back in. And this isn't a case of it holding the line, but it was bent properly at first, but the heat and the manipulation created a gap.
There we go. That's good.
There you go. Okay, so on that main joint now, if you ran the solder along the outside already?
Not on the outside, only the inside.
Okay, so try the outside, and then we'll just do a bit of cleaning with the sanding stick. The official Hobby Center sanding stick.
The flux in this is also a very good idea. That's very convenient.
Yeah. One thing I'd really recommend, if you spill flux on yourself, it's like, well, the older generation will remember climbing trees and getting sap on your pants and would not come out. So this stuff, I would really recommend. I didn't bring one, but one of the 3D printed holders or bases that you can put glue in. Again, to be a bottle, I would definitely use one on this. Also, I didn't mention the iron that I'm using. It's a Weller iron that's the most popular brand in the world. If you're going to look for an iron, make sure it's not a discontinued item that the solder tips will no longer be available for. That happened the place I worked. We ordered a bunch of irons and found out we couldn't get tips half a year later. But it's a variable controlled, temperature controlled iron. That is essential for this. You saw that I had to increase the heat to make it flow, much more easily. If you use one of those sort of $8 plug-in irons that just has one heat, you have no way of manipulating the solder. It's all or nothing with those, so I wouldn't recommend those.
Need more flux noise. Yeah. Underestimating that.
Yeah. And the more comfortable you get doing this, the faster you manipulate the weld line, the soldering line, the easier it becomes. But again, that's something like right now, what you're doing is perfect. And it's like any other technique you do with modeling, it just becomes easier and more natural over time. Yeah, that looks good.
I already did that one, so I've got all the three sides.
Okay, so what you can do now is, and again, I would normally clean first, but I didn't bring the acetone. So if you want to go over that with the sanding stick, and you'll see the results you get. So I normally do the sort of the second finest first, and then the buff.
Is it lead solder? So it just
It's lead. It does have a certain amount of silver in it, so it's not as, I'm trying to think, cautionary. Yeah, it does contain lead. I had to do testing when I worked. We had an employee who had some health issues, and we got all of the government supplied tests to measure fumes, and it was almost a negligible amount. So with her wearing a mask, that caused any, stopped any kind of issues. So you can actually go really rough with that.
I'm just instinctively nervous with PE because I'm used to it being glue.
Exactly. That's, and that's actually a good point, because now you'll see that it won't fall apart on you. And if it does, you just have to add a bit more solder, a bit more flux. I
put a whole lot of solder on there.
That too is, it's like putty. When you start using putty, people either don't put enough or put too much, and it just means a slightly longer cleanup, but it happens.
This is strong enough that I could cause bends and damage in it without it falling apart.
That's the only danger you would have, is that you can bend it. You won't break the beads, but there is a chance you could bend a piece. So try the buffing side and see how that looks.
When you were doing this, I was thinking, like you would be able to roll this and it wouldn't separate.
That's correct.
Because when you do the two individual parts and try to roll them and then sear them together, they're never at the same.
They never hit. And if you glue them, you can't roll them, because that thickness of glue, which doesn't seem like much until the pieces separate and you see how much glue residue there is. But on here, you're looking at microns. There you go.
That's about there.
So what do you think?
And that is fantastic, and I don't know why I haven't done this. So.
It's honestly, it's the intimidation thing.
Yeah.
It's like modelers at first figure, oh no, I can brush paint. I don't want to use an airbrush. And once they use an airbrush, they won't go back.
Yeah, because you're stuck in your ways. You're comfortable with what you have, and it seems to work well enough. But
right. So what are your thoughts on this process?
It's much more convenient, I would say, for something like. I mean, if you have to do any significant bending, absolutely, this is. You have more confidence in handling this. If I just had a simple part and bend it once or twice, I would still see that in the model. But anything that's intimidating, anything that I would need this, and then you're concerned about it not holding properly, it's a big part. And like we just talked about, anything I'd like to roll with multiple components, this is fantastic. Much easier than I expected. Right.
And even, the more experience you have with this, you can get into smaller and smaller pieces. If you can picture, Aber did a set for their FT-17, the World War I French tank.
Oh, I can imagine.
And one of the accessories was the mask that they had to wear that had the chainmail, which was one photo etch piece, and the eye pieces were separate.
Yeah, with the little
so slits. In 35th scale, they were separate, and you can still solder those.
It was excellent. And also, larger assemblies like this, you cannot CA that; it would just fall apart.
Right. Right. Yes. Yeah.
It's impressive.
Yeah. And that one, I probably did that 20 years ago when that kit was fairly new, which accounts for the discoloring of the brass. And what I would do is just clean it properly before priming and painting.
Now, is this? You can see kind of some of the. I guess that's a thin layer of
Yes.
solder flowing over. That's not going to be visible after you prime it.
It might be. What I would do with that, something I also didn't bring, you can get something called solder wick, which looks like the coating of a coaxial cable. It's,
Okay.
it's brass or copper wire, whichever, that is just interwoven. And what you do, it normally has some flux in it, but if you add more flux and put on the surface and heat it, it draws the excess up. And I should do that there.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I can feather the edges and make it disappear.
Yeah. Could you use like steel wool or something, or would that mar the?
It might. I would probably be more prone to cut up one of the sanding sticks and use the finest one to buff it.
Okay. Make a little square. Just
Yes,
use tweezers.
yes. And one of those reciprocating sanders that Bill did a really impressive video on a short while ago. You can link to that one. So there we have it. So the main thing I wanted to really demonstrate this is that the proper tools will help you immensely. And learning to solder is something that is an intimidating step to start. And as Evan has just pointed out, once you finish it, you're thinking, well, why didn't I do this before? And Evan is going to excel at this.
Yeah, and there's not much investment. You just need some basic tools. It's not like you're buying a whole airbrush and compressor or something
Exactly.
expensive like that.
Yeah. So there we have it.
So I'd like to thank Paul for taking time out this early Sunday morning to teach us a bit about photo etch. I learned a lot from watching this. I am going to throw away my number 11 X-Acto and get a curved blade when I work with photo etch. I am definitely going to get me one of these files that both of you said was a very excellent thing for working with photo etch. And I realized I've been doing so much wrong.
We have this.
You'd have to plate each part, flux, plate, flux, attach. I've been trying to feed the solder in like I'm soldering plumbing or something, and I can see where I'm doing it all wrong. This was a good refresher for me. I hope it was very good for you. Again, thank you very much for coming out. We will add some more to this video if we haven't done it already, so stay tuned, and we'll see you again in the next one. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, don't forget, please subscribe, slap that bell, hit that like button, and join Team Hobby Center.